Shifting focus to more of the Big 12 in general. And I know this isn't exactly Baylor specific, but it would affect Baylor with this move that is being proposed and rumored. And it has to do with the greater college football landscape. The Florida State Seminoles got screwed, royally screwed by the College Football Playoff Committee. That's no secret to you. You already know that. They know that. You know that. The College Football Committee, Playoff Committee knows that. And all the headlines this week talking about how the CFP would lose X $100 million because they wouldn't have had an SEC team in there just shows exactly where their mind is at. And the fact that the playoff committee sits there and tells us it's one player not being in there that keeps an entire 13-0 ACC championship team out of the playoff is disturbing and disgusting. And Florida State is apparently thinking about boycotting this Orange Bowl against Georgia. And normally I would say don't do that, but I'm all in for this. Boycott them. Because those headlines of here's as much money as the college football playoff wouldn't make if you guys were in there, those will go away. People will forget about that. They shouldn't, but they will. Now, if you refuse to play Georgia in the Orange Bowl and those headlines are there, they don't go away. That becomes a story. That stays a story for years and years and years and could lead to martyrdom of the college football landscape for Florida State. So normally, no, play the game. But if Florida State is really thinking about this and their players are on board, I say go for it, man. Send a message. And especially, too, with being down your third-string quarterback, I don't think you're beating Georgia. So don't leave it. Don't leave the doubt. Leave the doubt of a 13-0 team that should have absolutely been in the playoff. And so the greater point of this is Florida State, they're not going to stop at boycotting a bowl game or even thinking about boycotting a bowl game. They need change. They were left out as the 13-0 ACC champions for a 12-1 Big 12 champion. So not being left out by another undefeated team in an equal conference. What the college football playoff told them is you're being punished because you're in the ACC. That the Big 12 is better than you. They spit on you because you're in the ACC and not in the Big 12. Florida State should be pissed about that. Texas might well be the better team. Might well be in terms of what coaches want to face. But you want to talk about a more deserving team, Florida State 13-0 ACC champions. They should have been in there. And quite frankly, if it were up to me, I would have kept Texas in there and put Florida State over Alabama, personally. And so that brings up an old demon for Florida State that they've been talking about for years now. They got to leave. They've got to leave the ACC. They just got screwed over by their own conference, like Baylor did back in 2014. But the difference is Baylor was not big enough to leave the Big 12. Florida State is big enough to leave the ACC. So naturally, their first look is towards the SEC, right? That's not going to work. SEC doesn't want them. They're okay with where they're at. And that's been evidenced by them not being in the cycle. Florida State. SEC went out and got Texas and Oklahoma. They don't want Florida State. So the natural landing spot for Florida State and possibly a Miami is the Big Ten. And for the Big Ten, it makes a lot of sense to get that corner of the country, to get another market in there, to get a great recruiting base in Florida. That said, the Big Ten's already pretty big. They're going coast to coast already. There is a small chance that they pass on that offer, and all Florida State would be left with is the Big 12. The Big 12 would take them in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. Florida State's going to say, okay, you want to leave us out because we're not in the Big 12? You can't leave us out now. But more likely they would go to the Big 10. And that would still have ramifications for the Big 12. If Florida State and Miami and Clemson and North Carolina leave the ACC, because it's not going to be just one, probably not even just two schools. If Big Ten's going and getting more of the East Coast and down into Dixie and Florida, they're going to get 3 or 4 teams. They're not just settling for Florida State. So then you have this ACC that has been gutted, that still has whatever, 10 teams, but none of them that are a draw, especially in football when they don't have Notre Dame. Then you're talking about a conference with Syracuse, Pitt, Boston College, Duke, Georgia Tech, Wake. That's a dead conference if this happens. So even if Florida State goes to the Big Ten, the rest of those schools need somewhere else to go. It's not going to be worth it to keep that conference around with the new subdivision and the continued realignment and the TV deals that are going to have to come in the next few years. That's when you would start to see an exodus going to the Big 12. And if that were the case, where Florida State and their buddies goes to the Big 10, all of a sudden, Brett Yormark and the Big 12 has their pick of the litter, kind of like they did with the Pac-12. Sloppy seconds, but then again, pick of the litter because they don't need to take everybody. Does that make sense? Is that a good enough analogy? So if that were the case, let's say it's those 4 teams that I mentioned: Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, and Clemson. Those are the 4 best programs in athletic departments in the ACC for sure, if nothing else for branding purposes in the case of Miami. Then the Big 12 can still get away with, okay, it's still 2 super conferences. That hasn't changed. We, as in the Big 12, are in the same spot. We're not getting any worse. We can only get better. And you bring in a Duke, it's great for basketball, decent enough in football. A Syracuse, which is a decent-sized brand. Pitt, which is not a bad athletics department in their good years, which they're not in a good year right now. Georgia Tech, you add a huge market there in Atlanta, and it doesn't make the schedule any more difficult by adding Georgia Tech in most sports, although they're better at Baylor at football. Geez. So even the Florida State has got to get out, like no matter what. And even if it's them going to the Big Ten, this benefits the Big 12 tremendously. So let me know what you think, please, down in the comments, because I'd love to hear some more perspectives on this, on whether Florida State would even have the chance of the Big 12, because I think they do if the Big 10 doesn't accept them, because they still need to move, and they could make this a very comfortably the 3rd best conference, which they already are, but now improve that and improve their college football playoff chances. Or if this just means all the castaways, all the outcasts of the ACC come to the Big 12. I'll take it either way, personally. I think it'd be great for the league.